Hi, it's Pete Cohen and welcome to the My 365 podcast series. Today's podcast is episode 129. And this is another episode where I'm absolutely delighted because I'm going to be interviewing one of the most successful British female athletes in history. It's the amazing Sally Gunnell. And I had the opportunity of working with Sally many, many years ago and got to know her well. And it's amazing when you get to interview people like Sally because you get to really understand a little bit more about their psychology. It's not that people like this don't think negatively. They are just everyday people just like you and me who have committed and applied themselves to doing something every single day. So in this episode, you're going to find out a lot more about how someone like this thinks and how you can apply some of the tools and tips and techniques that she's applied in her life to your life, plus the fact that it's an amazing story. So sit back, enjoy the podcast, and we'll see you soon. So I'm here with Sally Gunnell. Sally, thank you so much for joining me today.
Pleasure.
I really appreciate it. You are very well known for a number of things, but predominantly the thing that probably most people know you for is for running. And you are one of the most successful British athletes in history, right? You were Olympic champion, world champion, Commonwealth champion, European champion, and world record holder.
Well done. You've done your homework.
Well, obviously, I know you and had the pleasure to kind of work with you in the past. So tell us, what is it like? I mean, you must be asked this question a million times. What is it like being an Olympic champion?
I think when you achieve it, because it's something that you've thought about and you've dreamt about from when you're a very young age, and then you achieve it, and you're not quite sure what's going to happen afterwards. And I think the thing for me is just that it actually never goes away. And I always thought that you were only ever going to be Olympic champion for, to the next 4-year cycle. Mm-hmm. But I think what's astounded me is that we're, 30 years on, and you're still known, and and how much that meant to everybody that was out there. And I think that's been the hardest thing to sort of get in your mind, really. You're a bit like, wow, people still remember that day and what it was about. And it was a life-changing experience overnight. Well,
because you inspired a nation, right? You inspired so many people. And the way I got to find out about you, I don't know again if you know this, but I was involved with a Channel 4 program called Losing It, and it was an Equinox program. Yep. And I had the opportunity to come and interview you, but they gave me to go and interview Mike Atherton. And I'd much rather have come to interview you, especially after when the program was edited. And you spoke, and I was so, because my background is in sports psychology, I was so fascinated by what you said. And the documentary was about why at the highest level of sport do some people lose it and other people...
They still use it in schools, can you believe? I went to a school the other day and they said we've still got and we still show that interview. Yes. And you think, how many years ago was that? So,
well, you remember you spoke about this thing called the flow, that if you haven't seen this, go and Google it, watch Sally in 1993 winning breaking the world record and becoming world championships and crossing the line and not knowing that you won and not knowing that you broken the world record. I mean, that was just, you really didn't know? You had no idea because you were just walking around, right? And
no, because you've put yourself into a mental state to be able to deal with that situation, and that's what I had to learn towards the end of, when I was getting it right. That was the difference, really. And to get yourself into that mental state is all the work, the mental side of it that you have to do beforehand, not just, 24 hours, but the year beforehand. And that then allows you to be able to get into that state of, you know exactly what you've got to execute. You've worked it exactly out in your mind, and you know what the process is, you know what could go wrong, you know what you're doing, and you just go into this, this area that it's completely, you're almost like a third person. That's how somebody described it to me. You're a third person that's looking in, and you've rehearsed that so many times in your mind. And that's where I went in that race, into that almost third person, and just Did exactly. And it's not something that I could do week in, week out. It was only ever something that I was allowed to do twice in my whole career, because it's a hard place to get to.
Well, that was the thing that I found most intriguing, because you said you're lucky if you get into that space once or twice in your life.
Yeah.
Now, I've never been in the position that you have, putting myself in the line to go and compete at the highest level like that. So, but I would like to think we can always get into that space if we allow ourselves to. But I suppose it's hard, right, because of the way that we think. That it often do you think it's thinking that stops people being in that space where everything just disappears and they're totally in the moment?
I think it's a lot of, it'd be great, and I'd love to think I could get in there, day in, day out, and be able to do that. And I think you can to a certain degree, but that's about how deep. It's how deep you go to do that, and the work and the preparation that takes you to there. I think you can go to a certain thing, and I think that's about being much more positive about what you're doing. Because I think, as you talk about, it's controlling that inner voice, and that was something that I had to do as an athlete. Was, someone taught me how to do that and to control that, and that's the piece that I use now, that I've taken from my running, that I can do in all sorts of different ways that I do it. And it's being able to control the things that you're in control of, and not worry about the other areas, and not let that voice come in that puts you down. And that's the piece that you can do. But I think the piece that I can't get myself into now was just that intensity of what I had to do, and how, and that, David Hemery taught me that, and that was a whole 12 months before, I had to execute it, that I had to put myself into it. So it's a long time. And I would say to people, if they've got an event or they've got something massive that's ahead of them that means so much to them, then they could easily get into that place with the right mind.
See, that's where I find it so fascinating. Two things you just said there. The first thing is, so many people, if you ask them where they're going, what they want to do, very few people will tell you that they can think about the future. And I think it's so important for everyone to think about something in the future which fires them up, which you clearly had. But a lot of athletes, when they stop competing, and I know Jonathan Edwards, the triple jumper, he went into a massive depression afterwards, and questioned so many things, because your life is your sport, and then you stop. It's like, well, now what's my life about? Yeah. How did you deal with that?
I think there was a number of things, and I know a lot of people have struggled, and I can really understand that. I think for me, the last year was about putting new things in place. And I'm always very goal driven. I always need to have a reason to get up in the morning. Even if it's very tiny, I need to know what I've got to achieve in that day. Yeah. It doesn't have to be massive. And I think that's how I looked at it. And I think I was like, right, okay, this part of my life is finishing, and I know it's right. But I was excited about new things, and that's what I did. I put lots of different things in place that excited me, learning new things that I've never been able to do. I had new work that I was going to do within the BBC. I was going to have a family, so there was lots of things that that I got engaged in, and then I could put my energy into that. So I think it's about knowing and realising. I think I was very lucky to have had those highs. That's not normal. And to actually realise that sometimes you are very lucky in what you've achieved, and you can't expect that all the time, and learn from that and take it, and don't give yourself a hard time because you've actually done that, but let's put it in the right place almost.
It's fascinating. So in 1991, remind me what happened in 91, because you had a bit of a setback there, right?
Yeah, I was in a great shape of my life. It was the World Championships the year before, an Olympics, and I was in the lead. I lost concentration over the 8th hurdle, and basically I was worrying about things that were outside of my control. I was worrying about the other athletes, and I thought she looked really good. And then I, made mistakes, and I was second in the World Championships. People said brilliant, but to me, it just highlighted that I was probably in fantastic shape, and you can put all the work in, and you have to put the work in. You can't just get somewhere just with the mind and not with the work and that sort of ethos within it. But it just showed me that the thing that held me back was self-belief and
Yes.
doubt. And I think that's the biggest thing that, you know, when I talk to companies now, and a lot of the work we do around the corporate wellbeing, it's about how do you install that self-belief.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, actually as a woman, we're probably our biggest critic.
Yes.
And that's where I was with it. I never thought I was good enough. I never thought that I could do what other people had done, and I was too quick to put myself down. And that's when I brought in the sports psychologist, as in David Hemery, to really work with me on that mental side of it. And it was quite interesting because I think until I spoke to him, you know, what I had to achieve in that Olympics, I was scared of. And when we've got to do
did you vocalise
something-
that to him? Did you tell him, I'm scared?
Well, I didn't realise I was, and the reason why I wouldn't think about the race beforehand, or I'd only think about it the night before, because it is a scary place, because we've actually got to go and do this thing.
Yes.
And I think that's how a lot of people think. I think
Yes.
if there's something that's coming up in our life and we're not quite sure whether we can do it, or it's going to be hard work, or it's going to be a challenge, we'll deal with it when we have to. And we put it over there. And the thing that I had to learn with that is that thing never goes away. And the more that we can get it in control in our life, and the more that we face up to it and we have a bit of a plan and we sort it out, the easier and the clearer it becomes to what you're doing. So don't be afraid of it. And look at it.
It's
as a
fascinating. I
challenge.
remember you telling me. So, did you approach David Hemery? So, those of you that don't know, David Hemery was a 400 meter. He won 68 Mexico, or
68 Mexico Olympics. Yeah, I did, because, and I think that was it. I knew I couldn't do all these things on my own. I knew I needed a team, and it wasn't just him. We brought in a nutritionist.
Yeah.
We brought in much more around the sports science side of it and recovery. We started doing Pilates and yoga. So
Why Pilates in the early 90s as well?
yeah,
right?
well, all those sorts of things just for the body to recover. So it was about, you know, you can only go so far, and with your own ability, but in the end you need help and you need support. And so it was about looking at who could take us on to that next stage. So there was a whole group of people, and David was part of it around the mind, to help us go on to that next stage.
I didn't know that that you had that fear. I've you know, about what was coming, and I think a lot of people they either won't do the thing they're frightened of, or just push it to one side and then just kind of leave it to chance. So he told you to start thinking about winning, right?
Yeah, he just said to us, you've got to have a plan. You've got to know what it is you're trying to achieve and how you're going to get there. You've got to have clarity in the way that you're going to get there. You can't just rock up on that day and think it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Because you've put all that training in. You know, you've trained your body, but you haven't trained the rest of you. So he said, you've got to have clarity. So what we worked out was what was going to take to get there in this next year. What did I have to think about? What was it I was executing on the day?
Yeah.
So what was I going to hit, the first hurdle, the second hurdle? So basically I ran my race. And I wasn't trying to. So often I think people try, and not just in the sports world, they try and do what they think and they've seen others do.
Yeah.
And that doesn't work. You have to know what you're capable of doing, because, you know, on that day in Barcelona, there was people that were, you know, much stronger than me, much faster. They were probably physically better athletes because they were 6 foot tall. They were taking all sorts of things because they got banned afterwards. But what I had that they didn't have was that self-belief. And sometimes you might not always be the best out there physically, or, you know, or what your background or whatever else. But if you have that self-belief and you've worked on that side of it, it's you know, it's very powerful.
So when did you start working with him? 91?
Literally straight after 91.
Right, so you thought, you know what, I need some help here, which is a great thing, right, to actually say, you know what, I need help, which is something that often people don't like to do, especially men, you know.
And you still need help. I still got an amazing team around me of people that help you in day-to-day life. And I think it's about being brave enough to say you can't do it all yourself.
So you used to visualise, and so from 91 up to 92, how good were you at being able to see the race in 92 into the Olympics?
I found it really hard to start with. I think it was, it's not a natural thing, because I think it is that scary place. And so what you naturally do is you go to your comfort zone and you go to a nice little cozy place somewhere and not face up to it. So it took, I don't know, a good couple of months to actually learn how to do it. It's like a meditation.
Yes.
It's like you've got to find a place that you can do this. And, it wasn't, it didn't take long in that to do this. I probably in the first couple of months, I was probably doing it once or twice a week, and it would take 5 minutes, and it would be, I got into doing it when I was warming up, or I'd go and lie on my bed in the afternoon or something like that, so I could just get myself into that deep breathing state and then get to where I needed to do. And it was just about going through the process of what I was actually doing. And seeing yourself actually achieving it. I think that's the thing he taught. Don't ever stop at what you're trying to achieve. It's about how that feels to you, your family, to the people that have helped you. Because everybody, that have helped you have their own goals and their own challenges. So actually, it probably doesn't mean as much to them as it means to you. So it's understanding what they're going through as well.
I'd always loved the way you always would thank everyone else who was a part of your team, because a lot of people would look at a runner and think, well, it's just you, right? But you were only as good as the team that you built around you. Yeah. I'm so curious as to where David Henry learned that information, about visualizing, and he studied psychology.
Well, that was his, he was a psychologist, and I think he understood the 400 hurdles really well. But also, there wasn't sports psychologists at that time. It wasn't like now where we're really involved in British athletics, and it's all handed to them now as part of lottery money. They have a psychologist, they have a nutritionist, and it was at the time. What do you mean you're not tough enough to, it's a bit like mental health now. What do you mean you can't do this thing on your own? You need help. And so you never told anybody that you had somebody to come and chat to about your mind. It was just you took responsibility, and I knew that that's what I needed. And I think it's a little bit around mental health, and the stigma now is that you've got to own up to it and say, I need help and I need to go out and and have somebody to help me to get to this next stage.
I think one of the reasons you are who you are is you owned up to the fact that there were things you needed to address. And I think you could work with a psychologist but still not address the fact that there are issues that we all have, because, no one's perfect. No. So you won gold in 92. After that, were you still fired up about competing, and did you feel you had unfinished business in terms of the World Championships?
No, it's very different. So you then go on to, and I really can relate this to people in business, is that all of a sudden you've achieved something and you've got to stay at the top. Yeah. And the pressure is on because you've got to deliver time and time again. I started going through a whole situation where I felt that everybody said to me, you put a smile on my face that night you won, and I'm all of a sudden thinking, oh my God, I want everybody to be happy and do this for other people. And I then started to struggle because I hadn't put it in the right place. It wasn't about doing it for everybody else, because that was just added more pressure on to what I was doing. And it was more around, and that's when I had to go back and go and revisit the whole mind thing, because I wasn't doing enough of that straight after Barcelona to get myself ready for the world. And it was about doing this not for yourself, but you're doing this because you want to see what you're achievable. And it was almost putting it, what I had to learn is actually putting it into the right place in life, because nobody's going to die if you don't win. Yeah. Nobody is going to look at you as a failure. You still just got married to John. You still can have all those things. And I think for me, I had to rationalise it. And that's what I had to learn after winning in Barcelona and being an underdog and coming through to being somebody that everybody expects every time you're on the track. You've got to deliver, which is, which happens so often in the corporate world, time and time again,
Yes.
So it was about rationalising it and putting it in the right place. And if I can work hard, if I could put all those little increments in place and realise how important all those things is, the flow will happen and the energy will happen, and believe in the process.
So one of the things you notice with athletes is the great athletes is what are they doing when no one else is watching? The work that you're doing behind the scenes. and you did a lot of work behind the scenes, obviously inside your head. And so when you competed in 93, how much mentally stronger were you than you were in 92 and in 91?
Well, no, I had self-doubts in 93. That was probably the hardest, and I learnt more about myself than any other race because Barcelona, the Olympics, I went in and I ticked all the boxes, and that's great. But life isn't like that. What happens if things go wrong? A week before the World Championships in Stuttgart, I was ill. So I can't tick all the boxes. I nearly walked away. I nearly quit. I nearly said, why do I want to do this? You're an Olympic champion. You're not 100%. You haven't ticked all the boxes. Why do you want to go and put yourself on the line? And I had to work really hard at that whole mental side. And that voice that you talk about and I had in my head was massive. And, I had to fight that inner voice for the last 24 or 48 hours before I went out there, and had to force feed that, do you know what, you're just as good as everybody else, and all these sorts of things. And I stood on that line and I actually didn't really believe in what I was doing. I had such self-doubt, but I managed to get myself into that state of mind of force feeding those positive thoughts that the gun went, and I was a little bit like, I haven't got a clue what's going to happen here.
But you'd done so much training.
But I'd done so much mental beforehand that even though I had that setback and that illness, I had the resilience and pieces in place to be able to carry on and deal with it.
Yeah.
And to do it. And that's why looking at that whole piece around resilience and bringing in the team and building up yourself, that when these things happen, which is what most people don't do, you have these disappointments and it takes you 6 months to pick yourself up and move on. But if you can build that resilience into your life, you get knocked down, you get back up and you move on. And I think that's what that time really taught me. And I really believe the only way I won that and what broke that world record is because I had everything in place beforehand that allowed me to deal with that.
I would encourage everyone to go and watch 92 and 93, Sally in the Olympics, Sally in the World Championships, because it's great, right? We're living in the YouTube generation where people can go and watch these things. Yeah. And I was very fortunate when you did you hang your shoes up? Is that what they say? Hang
your spikes up.
Hang your spikes up. I was very fortunate to work with you for the first, I think, 3 speaking engagements that you did, which was so much fun for me to be on stage with you. And the first talk we gave was to IBM in Chichester. And we both got some help from someone who was helping me. And I don't know whether you know this, but he kind of gave us a bit of advice. And afterwards, when it all finished, it was standing ovation, everyone loved it. You were pregnant, actually, with your second child. I got on the phone to Raphael and I said, it was amazing, blah, blah, blah. And he went, what's next? And I was taken aback by what he said, because it was like, what he was saying was, you've created something, now what are you going to do with it, with the hype that you've created? And I think one of the things that's great about you is that you do massively get inspired by inspiring others and taking what you've learned. And you're not one of these athletes who just wants to get up and just talk about what you did. You want to take the learnings of what you did and give them to other people so that they can improve their lives. I mean, that's...
Yeah, and it's not something that I really thought about doing. It's something that I got into and I started doing and realised the effect that it had. And, and you think, wow, if you can reach out to so many people and they take one thing away, then that's massive. And and I love it. And I think that whole thing around, Raphael and moving on is, I think that's what sport teaches you. You're only ever as good as your last race.
Yeah.
And, you might have stood up stage and you've done it. But I think what sport has always taught me, and life really, which I use now, is how can I be better? What can I do? How can I improve? How can I get to more people? Yeah. How can I? And I think it's, I was very lucky to have that sporting background to allow this, rather than sit back on your laurels. It's all about, that progression and how can I offer more and all those sorts of things. And, and I think that's allowed me to have, I don't know how many years, I'm just thinking my eldest son is nearly 20, so 21 years since I've retired to still be in reinventing myself and dealing with all sorts of new things to be able to move on.
And still inspiring people to this day. Let me just get your opinion about a couple of things. So one of the things I think is why a lot of people struggle, because they know there's a gap between where they are and where they could be with their health, their business, their well-being. And that's where I think a lot of people struggle, because they just know deep down there's more to them than meets the eye. Do you think that's the case? Do you think that's where a lot of people's possible dissatisfaction comes from?
Yeah, I think it's really important to actually have real clarity in what it is you're trying to achieve, because I think lots of people just turn up each day, to the same job or to whatever, and they're not quite sure where it's going and what they're doing in their life. And I think it's really important to have something you're aiming for. However big or however small it is, doesn't matter, but to know what the reason is. And then I think it's really important to know how we're going to get there and what's that. And that then engages you in you've got a purpose in what you're doing. And then the thing is, I think what we all do is we just that self-doubt. We don't believe in, can we really do this? Are we capable of doing this? And what happens? And and it's about learning when things go wrong. It's, I think again what sports taught us is that you turn it into a positive, because actually this makes me a better person.
Yes.
And I think if you can learn to have that, because all those mistakes, rather than be dragged down and thinking, I'm never going to do this because this has happened, which is what always going to happen. It's about, okay, so that's happened. Why has that happened? What can I change? What can I learn from this? And maybe if I learn from this, it makes me a better person to be able to achieve what it is that I'm trying to achieve in 2 months' time, and feel happy and satisfied in what I'm doing as well. So
what about now, looking forwards, what's Sally Gunnell passionate about? Where's she going?
I think it's about a number of things. We're still doing lots of different things, which I love. I'm still in a great position where, I still love the motivational speaking, even after all these years.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Absolutely love it. I think it's changed over the years. I think it's much more around personal development and self-belief and all those sorts of things. The corporate wellbeing has sort of led on from that. So again, it's lovely to have a team of people that I work with, where we've all got the same goal of being able to grow that and, within companies, and make sure that people and individuals within companies are supported in their wellbeing journey through the corporate side of things. Still love a lot of the charity. Boys are really important to me. I've got 3 boys, and being at home and seeing them develop and helping them is really important.
And your health and your well-being is still a major priority?
Massively. It's every day I try and do some exercise. I still just been to Pilates this morning. It's about having your health and well-being and energy to be able to pass on and to support other people, and that's why we do it.
I think with what the work you do in the corporate world is obviously fantastic. I hear a lot of people talk. I was with the woman from the managing director from Accenture, and she was saying the impact that you had on her. And one of the things I think people in business do, they set business goals, but they don't set goals around their wellness. They don't really set goals around their family, and all those areas are so important. And as we wrap this podcast up, there's a few things I wanted to say to you. So when I got to know you, I said this story before, but you changed my life. I remember moaning about how I didn't like living in London, and you just looked at me and just said, move. And then it hit me. I thought, oh, move. And the next thing I know, I moved out of London into a 3-bedroom house on my own in the middle of nowhere, which I absolutely loved living there. But I also got to know you, your husband, and I got to know Finley. I used to play with him, have fun with him. And then I didn't see him until recently. And it was 14 years later, I think. It was a long time. And it's really hit me how important time is, because there's so many things in life you can get back. If you can get back money, you can get back your health, but you can't get back time. And it really has made me look at time a bit differently and think, oh my God, that time's gone so quickly. I want to make the next 47 of my years even better than the last 47 of my years. And I want to thank you for that. But I also wanted to thank you because you told me to move. I did move, and I lived there for 4 years, and then I ended up coming here, and then I met my business partner who's next door, and that's how I've been doing all this, and all because you said one word.
Move. There you go.
And
I can't remember that, but I think the whole thing around, it's about getting the balance and that whole time management thing, and living in the now. I think that's the thing that I've learned is, we're on this mad conveyor belt, and sometimes it's about finding ways that you can, live in the now. And what does that look like? Lots of people talk about mindfulness and all these sorts of things. To me, it's about finding something which is, I call my me time.
Yeah.
And, going for a run with the dogs is my mindfulness. It's my me time and living in the now. And I think it's about making sure as individuals that you don't lose touch with that, and that's sometimes what happens. You end up on this rat race and you're looking at everything else.
You're not actually enjoying what's going on.
No, exactly, and with the process, and sometimes it's about bringing back, and how do we bring that now into our lives? What does that actually look at? And I think that's the thing that I've had to keep reminding myself to do. It's something that you end up going off and getting on this conveyor belt, and sometimes you have to say, whoa, hang on a minute. You can do all these things, but you've got to bring it back and live in that now. And what does that? And it might just be you sit down and have a cup of coffee, and you watch the birds out the window. It doesn't have to be complicated.
I heard someone say recently that mindfulness is just quite simply observing new things.
Yeah.
Just being aware.
But it's what makes you happy, and it's about just observing what is out there and finding time to do that.
I would encourage everyone to go and watch Sally competing in 92, 93. How can people follow you? Can they follow you on Instagram?
Yeah, we're on all sorts. Yeah, SallyGunnell.com.
SallyGunnell.com.
Get onto their websites, and just Sally Gunnell. We're there.
And feel free to make any comments if you've enjoyed the show. Feel free to share it. If you've got any comments for Sally, just make them in the podcast. I'm very grateful to you because I'm inspired, and I know lots of people listening to this will also be inspired as well. So thank you so much for your time, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Brilliant.